Hello, I'm Montse Alvarado. EWTN News In Depth is next.
This is the moment we've marched for and prayed for and worked for and advocated for so many years.
Hundreds gather outside the Supreme Court as the most significant challenge to legalized abortion is heard in nearly 50 years. What will the justices decide? Legal analysis of oral argument and what clues might be drawn from the justices' questions. A leading democracy advocate in Hong Kong has now been in jail for a full year. We get an update on Jimmy Lai's case from religious liberty experts.
Will be a moment of sharing our not only joys, but also our suffering.
We preview the Pope's visit to Cyprus and Greece, his presence bringing hope to countries which have become gateways for migrants and refugees. And what do priests really think about the future of the Catholic Church in America? Details of a new survey whose results might surprise you. EWTN News In Depth starts now.
This is Roe v. Wade on trial, and this has been 49 years in the making. It's a really historic moment for the pro-life movement.
I truly feel Roe versus Wade was not decided correctly. But today, with the technology we have, it's given us that opportunity to look at it again.
A Mississippi senator and a pro-life advocate among the divided crowd in front of the Supreme Court as justices hear a Mississippi case, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, that could upend decades of debate over abortion in America. The people outside the court, as well as the justices inside, all acknowledge the historic nature of the case and the gravity of the moment. In oral argument and rebuttal that lasted nearly 2 hours, the question centered on whether abortions should be regulated by the people at the state level, as Mississippi Solicitor General argued, or if there's a fundamental right to abortion which places the interests of the mother above those of the child, as argued by the United States Solicitor General. Reporter Mark Irons reports from the U.S. Supreme Court.
To understand the American debate around abortion now, take a look at the signs of the time and their different shades this week outside the Supreme Court. Phrases like abortion is essential or equality begins in the womb, showcasing differing opinions side by side.
Mississippians want to limit abortion and protect life in the womb.
But it's also freedom of choice. And once you start taking people's freedom of choice away, it's a slippery slope.
But the opinions formed by Supreme Court justices inside the highest court in the country will receive the most attention. On Wednesday, the justices heard 2 hours worth of oral arguments for and against a Mississippi law restricting abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. But this case, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, is doing something more. Nearly 50 years of Supreme Court established support for abortion, starting with the landmark 1973 decision in Roe versus Wade, is now in question.
And it's been decades since the Supreme Court heard a real challenge to Roe versus Wade. The last time they took up a case of this magnitude, pro-lifers disappointed.
The court's 1992 decision in Planned Parenthood versus Casey reaffirmed Roe. But Scott Stewart, Mississippi Solicitor General, is hoping times have changed.
This court should overrule Roe and Casey and uphold the state's law.
Before the Supreme Court, Stewart argued abortion should be an issue individual states decide. Julie Rickleman, Senior Director of the Center for Reproductive Rights, argued abortion is a right found in the Constitution.
It's liberty, Your Honor. It's the textual protection in the 14th Amendment that a state can't deprive a person of liberty without due process of law.
If the Mississippi law is upheld, it would be nothing less than historic, banning abortion after 15 weeks. That would overrule Supreme Court precedent established by Roe and clarified by Casey that prevents states from restricting abortion before 23 or 24 weeks of pregnancy, defined by the court as the point of viability, when a fetus is capable of living outside the womb. Justice Sonia Sotomayor says the justices shouldn't change that precedent now.
15 justices over 50 years have, or I should say 30 since Casey, have reaffirmed that basic viability line.
Depending on what the majority conservative court ultimately decides, Roe v. Wade could be completely unraveled. Justice Brett Kavanaugh noting that in its history, the court has decided cases before that change course, reverse precedent, and make a better decision.
Why then doesn't the history of this court's practice with respect to those cases tell us that the right answer is actually to return to the position of neutrality and not stick with those precedents in the same way that all those other cases didn't?
These crowds will have to wait for the Supreme Court verdict. The justices are slated to announce their final decision next summer. But pro-lifers are hopeful, including Mississippi House of Representatives member Becky Curry.
I never dreamed that I'd be standing before the Supreme Court.
Representative Curry authored the state bill now in question before the High Court. She's also a registered nurse. Curry says through a clear lens of science and technology, Mississippi lawmakers saw it fit to create a 15-week ban on abortion as a starting point.
It was just the right thing. When you see a baby that has all of its organs, it sucks its thumb, it feels pain, and when you have a brutal abortion process, it feels that pain.
Curry holds the same view as the Catholic Church, that life begins at the moment of conception. And that's the same view held by Monica Snyder, but she says her view has nothing to do with religion. As a matter of fact, she's atheist.
You don't have to be religious to have a problem with killing humans.
Snyder is the executive director of Secular Pro-Life. She's 21 weeks pregnant with a baby girl. Her view that life begins at conception comes down to science.
The human organism begins as the zygote. That's a fact of biology. I majored in chemical biology at Berkeley. I did forensics at UC Davis, so I'm really into the bio side. It is a human. That's just a fact.
Among the pro-life voices in this crowd, Anya Baker, a working mom from Mississippi, proud that her state could bring about big change in this country. She calls it a David versus Goliath kind of tale.
Mississippi, a state people often refer to as 50th place for so many metrics, but first place for defending life. I think it's a perfect David to go up against the abortion Goliath.
Mark Irons, EWTN News in Depth.
Unexpected secular voices joined the rally on Wednesday, and as Mark indicated, it will take months before we know the outcome of this case, likely next June. If Roe and Casey are overturned or significantly weakened, 26 states, shown here in red, are poised to attempt to restrict abortion in some way as quickly as possible. Most of these states have laws or constitutional amendments already in place waiting to be implemented. Others have legislation in the pipeline to ban abortion if and when the federal ban to restrictions is overturned. At the core of the legal argument is viability of the unborn child in the womb. An op-ed in the Wall Street Journal by Dr. Gracie Christie addressed that issue. She joins us now to give us a medical take on what we heard from the justices. Gracie, it's so great to have you here with us. First of all,
thank you so much.
The article you wrote in the Wall Street Journal discussed what you called the obsolete science behind Roe v. Wade. Can you tell us what you believe are the differences between now and 1970 in neonatal medical care?
Well, so much has changed. To start with, the line of viability has moved drastically. Children as young as 21 weeks old, 21 and a couple of days, have survived with extensive help from the neonatal ICU, of course. We've also had tremendous advances in our knowledge of fetal pain. For instance, we know that fetuses can feel pain much earlier than we thought that they could, even maybe up to 12 weeks, as early as 12 weeks, which is something that should give all of us pause. And also my own particular field, which is radiology. I do fetal ultrasounds, and that didn't even really exist in 1973. But now every little baby in America is imaged through ultrasound, and those beautiful pictures have changed American minds and hearts about the humanity and liveliness of the fetus.
And hopefully they'll have some kind of influence at the court. This issue of medical changes featured prominently in Justice Sotomayor's opening inquiry, where she first discussed fetal pain. Let's listen to her questioning.
There's about 40% of dead people who, if you touch their feet, the foot will recoil. There are spontaneous acts by dead brain people. So I don't think that a response to by a fetus necessarily proves that there's a sensation of pain or that there's consciousness.
Gracie, what's your response to her comparison?
Well, first I pity her because it's a really, really ignorant thing to say. But I feel sorry for her because she's not a doctor, she's not a scientist. On the other hand, I'm not sorry for her because what she's trying to prove is that fetuses, just because they're not born yet, don't deserve any care or concern for their pain, for the horror that they endure in abortion. And also, scientifically, she's completely wrong. When a brain-dead patient moves, it's a very specific thing called a spinal reflex. It's elicited in very specific ways, and it only happens because they're on cardiac support and respiratory support. This has nothing to do with the movement of any human being or any living being at all who feels pain and recoils from pain, which is what the Solicitor General of Mississippi was referring to when he was trying to get at the idea of fetal pain and how that should make us stop and love these babies.
And there was another aspect to the questioning that Sotomayor and Alito got into, and they talked about, with Solicitor General Scott, life at the beginning of conception as a religious view. Is it a religious view, a philosophical one, or a medical one?
It's a simple biologic fact that life begins at conception, and the nascent human life, that very early human life, is very distinct from the mother, has its own DNA, and is alive. We have biological markers for what constitutes life, and a fetus, an embryo, even the very first cell of a human being. They fulfill all those requirements, those biological requirements for life. So there is no biologic or scientific doubt as to when life begins.
Gracie, there were other scientific words used, viability and quickening. Those were the words of the day in the argument, where the Biden administration said the government has an interest in a baby's life only after viability. Can you explain that for our viewers?
Well, the other side, the pro-abortion side, wants us to only start considering that a baby might be worthy of protection after the baby can be put on life support in an ICU if removed from the mother. But that's there's no philosophic basis for that or legal basis for that, really. All we're saying is a baby at 20 weeks can be killed legally, but a baby at 21 weeks can't be killed legally. There's no difference in that baby, except that right now, today, a neonatal ICU with intensive care 24 hours a day with an entire team of dedicated, loving people can keep a 21-week-old baby alive some of the time, but they can't at 20 weeks. Well, maybe in a couple weeks or in a couple years, that next baby will live at 20 weeks, born at 20 weeks. So the line of viability is, first of all, it's a shifting line. And second of all, it has a lot to do with your location. Do you have a great neonatal ICU near you? You know, viability in the United States is very different from viability in South Sudan by many weeks. So a child's worth should not be measured in terms of the kind of science and the kind of support that the baby needs to survive.
And this brings up many questions for us about access to care for marginalized communities. Thank you so much, Gracie. We appreciate your analysis.
Thank you.
For legal analysis of what happened this week at the High Court, we're joined by attorney Heather Hacker. As the former Assistant Solicitor General of Texas, she's argued numerous times before state and federal appellate courts, and she's represented pro-life groups in similar challenges and filed an amicus brief in this case, the Dobbs case. Heather, it's great to see you again. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me again, Montse.
Justices Breyer and Sotomayor both began with their concern that overturning Roe and Casey would make the court look political. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think Solicitor General Scott Stewart hit the nail right on the head when he said that actually upholding what many people agree is erroneous or bad precedent is actually more political. Because if the court is only doing that because it fears the public reaction, then that's taking into account external considerations where in reality, under the stare decisis doctrine and just under the Constitution, the court should only be concerned with what the law is and should go from there. And so looking just at the precedent and deciding whether or not it should be retained or overruled, that's the question before them, and to consider other reactions, as the court did wrongfully in Casey, is actually the more political choice.
So looking at the history and where this right is grounded really tells us where the court should be going in a non-political way. It seemed the justices were looking for a way to replace this 30-year-old viability standard with something else. One of the things mentioned was expanding undue burden. What does that mean?
So I think that the underlying problem with that, which I think that several of the justices seem to recognize, is that the undue burden standard itself is very malleable and really meaningless and arbitrary. And so, one problem they would have if they sought to just replace the viability standard with something else is that any other standard that they could choose would arguably be just as arbitrary as viability. If they, for example, chose to draw a line at the first trimester, then you would have some similar issues in terms of the workability of that standard, how that standard is justified, and then you still have the overarching problem of course, the Constitution still doesn't say anything about this.
And choosing where they're drawing these lines effectively has them legislating this issue. Am I right?
That's 100% correct. I mean, that kind of line drawing and balancing, that is the exact thing that the political process is supposed to be used for. And that's what's so negative about the Roe and Casey precedents is that it's essentially shackled the states to the court's view of, this issue, when in reality, the state legislatures are the ones that are supposed to be weighing these important interests and drawing these lines, not the court.
And so the discussion there wasn't necessarily one about legal issues, but wasn't necessarily one about being pro-life or pro-choice, but one about the legal understanding of this. And Justice Kavanaugh seemed to suggest that the court figuring out how to be scrupulously neutral on abortion was the ultimate task. Let's take a listen to what he said.
That this court should be scrupulously neutral on the question of abortion, neither pro-choice nor pro-life. But because they say the Constitution doesn't give us the authority, we should leave it to the states.
Sounds like something that might end up in an opinion. What do you think?
I think that's a very good possibility. And I think that he was absolutely right to point out the fact that because the Constitution doesn't say one thing or anything one way or another about abortion, that is the exact solution. And that is the non-political solution, is to give it to the political branches to hash out and get the court out of the business of being what several members of the court have termed in the past the National Ex Officio Medical Board when it comes to abortion, which is clearly not a proper role for the Supreme Court.
Justice Barrett brought up the discussion of states' rights and the federal Constitution. Let's play reading the tea leaves here for a moment. Can the court actually uphold the Mississippi law without overturning Roe?
Well, certainly anything is possible. The members of the court are very smart, and I'm sure they could come up with a way to do that if they wanted to. Now, whether that opinion would be consistent with the law and really intellectually honest, I think is a different question. And I think that, if they were to uphold Casey, yet say that this law passes that muster, there really is something different going on there. They would be reinterpreting Casey, I think, because Casey says that the state may not restrict abortion pre-viability, and this is clearly a pre-viability restriction. So regardless of whether they admit that that's what they're doing, it would still involve a fundamental reinterpretation of Casey, which is why, if the court has to twist itself in knots to be able to say that it's still keeping Casey, that's just really another argument as to why they should just be honest and scrap Casey altogether.
And take everything back to the states. So redefining where and how we can restrict abortion in this country. Heather, it's so great to have you. Thank you for your analysis.
Thank you for having me.
Our coverage of this case continues on our social media channels. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to see exclusive videos and pictures from our news crews at the Supreme Court rally this week.
Next on EWTN News In Depth, 2 years after massive government protests in Hong Kong, we update the situation of Jimmy Lai, the newspaper publisher now behind bars for a year. Religious liberty advocates weigh in.
I'm a missionary for my church, and I'm, trying to make the world a little bit better, try to show some love to the people of Athens.
And we go to Cyprus and Greece to see Catholic relief work in progress, helping a wave of refugees seeking freedom. That story coming up.
From demonstrator to detainee, Jimmy Lai, a self-made billionaire and media tycoon, is one of the most prominent faces of the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong. Among the most high-profile people charged under China's national security law, Lai has now been imprisoned for 1 full year. Welcome back to EWTN News in Depth. Jimmy Lai is one of many behind bars after taking part in pro-democracy demonstrations in the summer of 2019. Protests and marches took place across Hong Kong that year in the wake of the Chinese Communist Party's novel extradition bill. It allowed Hong Kong to detain and transfer people to mainland China. Critics argued the law eroded Hong Kong's judicial independence and exposed the former British colony to China's flawed justice system. Lai was accused of organizing the protests, which drew hundreds of thousands of people. As those protests grew, so did the attention from the international community. World leaders were concerned about civil liberties being chipped away, including freedom of the press. In an effort to stamp out the pro-democracy demonstrations, China quickly imposed a new national security law, which vaguely defined crimes such as secession and foreign interference. The Hong Kong police charged Lai under that law for allegedly colluding with foreign forces, but didn't specify how. They also charged him with fraud related to his business offices. Lai, who founded media company Next Digital, published Apple Daily, one of the few independent pro-democracy news outlets in Hong Kong. Police raided the newspaper's newsroom and froze $18 million of assets over the summer. The paper printed its last issue in June, a huge blow to freedom of the press in Hong Kong. Lai stood by his newspaper's role in supporting democracy, and on December 8th, Lai, a devout Catholic, will turn 74 behind bars. Lai is just one of at least 100 people arrested under the national security law. To give us perspective on the international repercussions China's ever-tightening grip on Hong Kong is having, we're joined by Mark Clifford, president for the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong, who worked alongside Jimmy Lai at Apple Daily, and Father Robert Sirico, president emeritus of the Acton Institute and priest of the Grand Rapids Diocese. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Mark, you have firsthand knowledge of what Jimmy Lai was building with his media empire. What was it like working alongside him as a journalist and manager?
Well, he's an extraordinary guy, and as your wonderful introduction showed, I mean, he's a very, very brave man. Here's a person of almost unlimited resources. He could have moved to one of his apartments or houses in other countries around the world, and he chose to stay with the people of Hong Kong. This is a city that gave him everything. He arrived as a 12-year-old penniless immigrant, worked his way up, and after the 1989 killings in Tiananmen in Beijing, he decided that Hong Kong democracy, rule of law, freedoms were something that needed to be protected. And he founded Apple Daily, and he's one of the bravest people that I've ever met. And as you say, a year today, he's been in jail. He's about to celebrate his birthday in jail. He's chosen this fate for himself. He could have run. He didn't. He's an amazing guy, and I thank you for shining a spotlight on him.
An example for all of us. Father Sirico, your defense of human rights and economic freedom led you to Jimmy Lai's story. What can you tell us and tell our viewers about the state of freedom in China and Hong Kong?
Well, it's at a very low ebb right now, and of course, Jimmy's imprisonment is an example of that, along with many other people who are in prison right now. The restrictions on people's freedom goes across the board, not just Catholics, not just business people, but the Uyghurs in China. And you saw what happened to this young tennis player for simply calling out the kind of sexual abuse that was heaped upon her by a member of the high-ranking member of the Communist Party. This is a very dismal moment. I'd like to underscore the Chineseness of Jimmy Lai. This is a man who loves his homeland, who almost tears up when he speaks about China. He loves Chinese art. He loves Chinese music and Chinese food. This is not a battle between the West and China. It is a battle between Chinese people and the communist government, and that needs to be understood by everyone, including people on the mainland.
That's a fantastic point to make. Mark, you were a director of Next Digital, the parent company of Lai's Apple Daily. Who were the five jailed in the raid, and are they still serving sentences?
Well, we have 7 people from our company who are in jail right now, and interestingly, only Jimmy Lai has actually been convicted of anything. So it's a great question. Are they serving sentences? No, because they haven't actually gone to trial, but they're seen as too dangerous to be let out. So Jimmy was convicted on some rather minor peaceful assembly charges, and it's worth underscoring. Here's a man who his entire life has preached nonviolence, and he's being thrown in jail. He's manacled. He's put in heavy chains every time he's brought out into a public appearance in court, because there's an attempt to humiliate him, to ritually debase him, to show others what could happen to even a wealthy, powerful person like Jimmy Lai. Our chief executive officer was let off last June. Haven't seen him. He hasn't been free since then. He's been in court appearances. Our editor-in-chief and several other editorial writers. There are other people who've been arrested, including 2 of Jimmy's sons, on national security law charges, and our former chief operating officer. So it's extraordinary. You have 7 people from a newspaper in jail, several others affiliated or associated with the family or with the newspaper facing some very serious charges. So it's almost unbelievable that you can just hold people effectively a life sentence before even putting them up on trial. And as you mentioned in your introduction, we don't even know what Jimmy Lai has supposedly is guilty of. None of the other people have been provided with any evidence against them. So these national security law charges are just completely bogus.
No details and no due process. Father Sirico, Lai's entrepreneurial pursuits were grounded in an understanding of the virtue of work and the free market. Why is it important for Catholics to understand the perils of unchecked government power?
Well, because what it does is it assaults the dignity of the human person, who is a being that is creative. We're called to participate in the creation of this world by God himself. You should mention here, especially on EWTN, that Jimmy Lai is a Catholic convert, a friend of the great and brave Cardinal Zen. When you see the person of Jimmy Lai, what you have encapsulated here is the struggle for freedom across the board, the freedom of enterprise, the freedom of assembly, the freedom of speech, the freedom of conscience, the freedom of religion. And in his one person, we see the attack of communism on all of those freedoms, that no one will be free until all of these freedoms are granted by the Chinese government.
And how is enterprise and economic freedom such an important part of his story?
Well, as Mark has already mentioned, this man came to Hong Kong in poverty on a Chinese junk, and began to build little by little his own talent pool and his enterprises. This is human flourishing. This is the human person who mixes his intelligence and his talents with the material world and creates wealth and opportunity for thousands and thousands of other people. China had a brief period of time where that became evident, the possibility of that. And now under this president, this dictator, we see these freedoms being disregarded once again in the model of Mao.
Right, that's the rule of Xi Jinping. Mark, what comes next for Lai and his case? And do you know anything about his health?
Well, we do hear indirectly through his lawyers and through letters to his friends that he's holding up quite well. I've received several letters from him, but I've chosen not to be in further communication with him because of this vague national security law where anything can be used against someone. But I think that his faith, as Father Sirico said, he's a convert. He's buoyed by his faith and his wife and his friends, and he's chosen this burden. And I think he's holding up mentally quite well. Physically, well, as you say, he's about to celebrate his 74th birthday in prison, so that can't be a happy occurrence. But he has so many legal cases that we could spend the rest of the program just talking about them. And I think it's fair to say that as long as Xi Jinping wants him to be in jail and wants to try to destroy Jimmy Lai as that very symbol of freedom that Father Sirico so eloquently mentioned, He'll be in jail. This is not about due process. This is not about rule of law. It's about lawfare. It's about using law to reach predetermined political ends.
Well, Father Sirico, we have time for one more question. I want to note one thing about the power of the media. Your team at the Acton Institute is working on a second documentary on Lai's life and his current struggle. Let's take a quick look at a part of the trailer.
Mr. Lai insisted on marching in front where the authorities could see him.
I've been arrested 3 times.
The Hong Kong police raided the Apple Daily compound.
It's very likely that, I will have to go to prison.
He chose to stay in Hong Kong.
Their house is firebombed.
All I had, this place gave me.
I watched this man willingly give up the life of a billionaire to become a dissident.
Jimmy Lai has chosen to specifically stand for something that he believes in. Father Sirico, why is that so important to share?
It's important to share because it's an inspiration to everyone, and we hope that it'll be an inspiration to the Chinese people themselves. We hope to deliver this documentary in time for the Olympics that will take place in mainland China so that the whole world can see what this government is doing to their own people.
Well, we've been covering the controversy of the Olympics and what's going on with the Chinese government and the Uyghur Muslims. So thank you both. I know all of us are praying for Jimmy Lai and his family.
Thank you.
We love you! We love you! We love you!
And the Pope goes on a healing mission to Greece and Cyprus, reaching out to the Orthodox community as well as addressing the refugee crisis. Our correspondent is there with details up next.
Pope Francis arrived in Cyprus on Thursday at the beginning of a 5-day trip to the Mediterranean island country and to Greece. It's all part of an effort to strengthen ties between the Catholic and Orthodox churches. The Pope also wants to bring attention to the plight of migrants from the Middle East and Africa who have made the country's major stopping points as they try to enter Europe. The refugee situation is complex, and though Catholics make up a small part of the population in both countries, they're taking an outsized role in helping ease the transition of immigrants to their new homes. EWTN News In Depth reporter Colm Flynn traveled to both nations to show us that Catholic mission.
I'm standing in front of what's known as the UN buffer zone in Cyprus, which divides the Turkish-controlled part of Cyprus in the north and the Republic of Cyprus in the south. This border runs right through the capital, Nicosia, and is where Pope Francis will be starting his papal visit. Cyprus is an island in the Mediterranean Sea with a population of 1.2 million. It has seen an enormous influx of immigrants over the past number of years, coming through Turkey, from Syria, across the Middle East, parts of Africa. In fact, Cyprus has the highest number of asylum seekers per capita in the EU. And every day, outside the Church of the Holy Cross in Nicosia, hundreds arrive looking for help.
I'm struggling at the moment to find a job. That's why I'm come here to, they're gonna help me, Caritas.
Caritas and welfare also, those can help us because those know that we are coming from another country.
Social welfare application, okay?
Caritas Cyprus works with them, helping them fill out their papers, apply for jobs and find accommodation. Elizabeth Cassanias is the executive manager.
Please go under the cover. Right now, we just can't keep track of the numbers. Just before COVID in 2020, we were getting probably visitors to our migrant center here in Nicosia, probably between 100 and 150 people a day. They need to find their way to the social welfare office. They need to find their way to the medical services. They need to figure out how to find a home, a job.
Pope Francis will come here and pray with the migrants, which will be symbolic of the entire 4-day trip.
Yeah, call me Father George because it's easier way to translate from Polish to English, Italian, Giorgio, George, it's fine.
Father George is the Vicar General of the Latin community and is also in charge of organising the papal visit in Cyprus. Why do you think Pope Francis has chosen to visit Cyprus now?
Very good question. This is a question that I put myself. One Pope is coming to Cyprus, but I have one very easy answer, how easy it's for me. He is choosing peripheries. And Cyprus is in the periphery of Europe, in the small country, small Christian Catholic communities. So this is the first, I think, a reason that Pope is showing closeness to the people that are not in the top of numbers of importance.
Prior to the trip, the Vatican announced that Pope Francis would be taking a number of refugees from Cyprus back to Italy, where work was underway to grant them asylum, offering a lucky few out of the thousands the chance at a new life.
I have a dream, like I just want to be a great man, I just want to work, I just want to have something to do to survive my family.
Another special moment will be Pope Francis's meeting with Chrysostomus II, the Archbishop of the Orthodox Church, which is the major religion here. It is part of the identity of the Cypriot people. And the relationship between the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church has often been tense. It's hoped that this meeting could help improve the relationship between the two.
I'm coming to you to listen to you and to open the ways of the mutual understanding. The motto that we have chosen for this visit is comforting each other in faith.
Then it will be to the country of Greece, with a population of 10 million people, where the Pope will visit the capital. With the Parthenon, which has been standing for 2,500 years, and the birthplace of democracy, Athens. In 2016, Pope Francis travelled to the Greek island of Lesbos at the height of the refugee crisis. He will return to hear similar stories of families who say they are fleeing their homeland, like the Al-Azawi family, who fled Syria in a boat.
As soon as the war began, we started looking for a safe place, but unfortunately they kept bombing every city. And that's when we realized we had to flee the country.
This apartment was provided by Caritas Greece, and the family are now waiting to hear if their asylum status will be accepted or if they will have to leave. Caritas are doing the best they can to assist them.
The Catholics are helping everyone. They don't think about religion. They help anyone who is in need, regardless of their faith.
Greece is predominantly Greek Orthodox. There are only around 100,000 Catholics, all made up of different cultures and backgrounds. Father Theodoros Kontidis is the newly appointed Bishop of Athens.
Like a mosaic of different colors and people. So we have the Polish community, the Filipino community, the Nigerian community, the Syrian community, etc., etc. So many different groups and communities. And so it is a challenge to unite all those different people. It's something important for us to think and to see our faith and our church in a new way.
What will this visit of Pope Francis mean to Greece and to Catholics here?
It's something very special. I hope also it is important for those who are far from the church, and this could be an opportunity to think again and to ask themselves, what about my faith?
What about the relationship with the Greek Orthodox Church? What is that relationship like?
Sometimes it is very easy for the people to imagine the Pope as the image of a religious imperialism toward the East. And perhaps sometimes in the history has been like that. But it is not true today. And we have to know better each other.
Although the Catholic Church is a minority in the country, like Cyprus, it provides a large outreach to those in need. At this clothing pantry, JRS volunteers Mariam and Susan are helping migrants who are coming looking for clothes.
The stories are terrible, and we can, as human beings, we should understand that we have to integrate them in the society and not shaming them and having all this climate of fear.
You really see how unfair everything is. It's really frustrating, but you also see how with small gestures you can help people or brighten at least their day.
And here in this soup kitchen, Caritas provides hot meals every day to families all over the community.
We prepare the food and then we put it in these bags and then we take them out and the people that come, we give it to them right here off the street. So it's wonderful.
Georgia is from Greece and is one of the volunteers and has built a strong relationship with many of the people she has helped over the past 10 years.
The people who are next to you smile always, and whoever gives to a poor, to a sick person, gives to me, said Jesus. Have a good day.
And it is here in the Greek capital that Pope Francis will bring to an end his Mediterranean papal visit. And after the suffering caused by the pandemic and the recent financial crisis, of which Greece was one of the worst affected countries in Europe, the Vatican released a statement saying that they hoped the Pope's visit would offer a ray of light for Greece and its people. In Athens, Colm Flynn, EWTN News in Depth.
The papal trip wraps up on Monday evening when Pope Francis returns to Rome. Coming up next, news headlines in the Week in Review. And a priestly analysis of the current state of the Catholic Church in America. We'll dig deep into the findings of a recent survey when we come back. New measures to combat coronavirus top the Week in Review. As we enter the colder months, the White House announced a winter COVID plan. President Joe Biden outlined the initiative on Thursday at the National Institutes of Health, saying unpopular lockdowns would not be a part of the new strategy. The COVID winter plan includes these elements, extending through March 18th the requirement to wear masks on planes, trains, and public transportation, requiring health insurance companies to cover the cost of at-home tests, and launching a public education plan to encourage 100 million adults to get their booster shots, and tighter travel rules for those entering the U.S. by air.
I'm announcing today that all inbound international travelers must test within 1 day of departure, regardless of their vaccination status or nationality. This tighter testing timetable provides an added degree of protection as scientists continue to study the Omicron variant.
Case numbers of the new Omicron variant remain small in the U.S. so far, but it's spreading across the country. Late this week, at least 5 states, New York, California, Minnesota, Hawaii, and Colorado, reported residents testing positive. Alarming COVID news from South Africa, where the Omicron variant was first identified. In a massive surge, South Africa's new daily coronavirus cases, concentrated in the Johannesburg area, have almost tripled in just 3 days. Health officials are now accelerating the country's vaccination campaign at pop-up sites, in shopping centers, and transport hubs. In an effort to keep Omicron from spreading, governments around the world have imposed travel restrictions against countries in southern Africa. The Archbishop of Paris has resigned amid reports he had an intimate relationship with a woman in 2012. Pope Francis accepted the resignation of Archbishop Michel Aupetit. A French magazine reported last week that Aupetit accidentally exposed the alleged affair after he mistakenly sent a romantic email to his secretary instead of the woman. Aupetit denies he had an intimate relationship with her, although he acknowledged in a statement that his behavior might have been ambiguous. A new survey of American priests points to some interesting findings, including lowering morale among U.S. clergy and increasingly conservative younger priests. The 2021 study surveyed more than 1,000 priests in the U.S. and found their life satisfaction is lower than in the last similar survey in 2002. Just 62% of priests this year said they're satisfied with life, down about 10%. They also have a less positive view of the church, with 48% saying the church is getting worse. That negative trend up 20% from 2002. Jonah McKeown, reporter for the Catholic News Agency and host of the CNA Newsroom podcast, broke down this survey in a recent CNA article. He joins us now to give us his take. Jonah, it's great to be with you. The researchers suspected that life satisfaction for priests, which is lower now than it was in 2002, is affected by the way the laity, the way we live our lives. What did the survey say about that?
Right, Montse. So the survey, the researchers who did the survey, they did offer some of their, their predictions, their takes on why the morale of priests may be going down. And one of the things they suggested is just something that we all know, is that the laity overall are in some ways not living out the church's teachings in many ways. I mean, one of the ways that they laid out is on sexual morality, for example. I mean, we know the unfortunate statistic that many women, many Catholic women even, do use contraception. And that's just one example. So that's just one of the things that the researchers suggested as a possible reason for a lowering of morale overall among priests in the U.S.
And the survey also made clear that there's a perception that younger priests, comparing them to other generations or more recently ordained priests, on average are more theologically orthodox or conservative. And there were two parts to that: beliefs about salvation and beliefs about sin. What was the construct of the salvation piece?
Right, that's a good question. So as you mentioned, in terms of orthodoxy, the way that the researchers tested that was by a single question, which basically was, do you, meaning the priest being asked, do you believe that faith in Jesus Christ is the sole means of salvation? And so in terms of the answers they got to that question, they found that among priests who self-identified as conservative, almost all of them, I think nearly 90%, said, yes, faith in Jesus Christ is the only means of salvation. Whereas priests who self-identified as, more liberal, I believe around 40% said that they actually disagreed with that statement. So it's not a completely comprehensive look at orthodoxy, of course, since it was only one question. But it is something really interesting to look at, especially broken down by political persuasion.
It was very interesting also that there was no mention of the transformation of seminaries around the country. However, what made this survey and comparison over time so interesting to you?
I think kind of just what you mentioned, that it was a comparison over time, because the first survey, I should say, this was kind of an evolution of a survey that was done by the Los Angeles Times in 2002. And as many of your viewers probably know, 2002, similar to 2018, was a pretty tumultuous year for the church because there were many revelations about sexual abuse and all this kind of thing. So it was interesting to see this survey, which reused almost all the questions from that previous survey, asking priests again, almost 20 years later, the same questions about morale, about morality, about orthodoxy. So I really encourage your viewers to read the whole survey for themselves.
It was interesting to see that support for their bishops, for their local ordinaries, didn't change over time. What do you think about that?
That is very interesting because, of course, again, as your viewers know, many people are not as trusting of their bishops anymore, again, because of the fallout from the sexual abuse crisis. But in terms of priests, like you said, it does seem as though they are still very trusting and loyal to their own bishops, which I think is quite interesting.
Very interesting indeed. Thank you so much, Jonah, for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So being from Mississippi, we're definitely just super proud that it's Mississippi that's bringing up this bill.
Next, back to the Supreme Court, where we get the student take on this week's big abortion case.
We saw many faces at the rallies outside of the Supreme Court this week. Black, white, young, old, Republican, and Democrat. Both sides were represented by all races and creeds. We share now some pro-life rally cries from young voices behind the pro-life movement in our Images of the Week. These college students providing resources for pregnant women and spreading the word that life is worth protecting.
This case and being here is just kind of like the climax of this whole semester, what we've been working towards.
Hey, hey, ho, ho, Roe v. Wade has got to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho, Roe v. Wade has got to go.
So we've been proactive in our community with providing women with pregnancy resources and just going out and door knocking this semester.
Empower women, promote life. Empower women, promote life.
literally going door to door, having conversations with people about just basically a post-Roe America.
As we get those resources out there, we know that women are going to need them more and more if this is overturned.
Hands off our babies! Hands off our babies!
So this case is a huge deal. We're praying and hoping that Roe v. Wade is overturned and that we just enter into this post-Roe America.
A big case with big implications. EWTN News In Depth will be here with full coverage in the months ahead as we await the Supreme Court's decision and continue our look at what potential post-Roe America will look like. I'm Montse Alvarado. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back same time next week with a report from the Basilica of St. Nicholas in southern Italy as we continue our Advent journey. See you then.